Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 20 of season 5. Sam and I had a recent discussion around blind spots in your environments. We had a talk about why discovering devices in your network is so important and how you start to get visibility. Here are a few things we covered. Why is discovering devices on your network important? How can you find devices using Microsoft technology? What are the benefits of finding discovered devices and providing the information into Defender XDR? And how is it licensed?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot for us for you to show the support to the show.
It's a very great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how was your holiday?
Hey Sam, it was good. Busy being on the beach and at the hotel and things like that.
All right.
How was your week?
All right, enough of that. We don't want to hit. Well, we do because I asked the question, but yeah, I don't think we want to know the answer. That's for sure. I'm glad you had a good week. Did you have enough time in your week to fully digest build?
No. Don't think I had a quick look at it. There was definitely a few things that caught my eye on there, especially around Copilot for 365, about this new Teams Copilot coming into play.
Oh yeah,
that sounds interesting.
What's the sort of general sort of feature there?
It's almost like it kind of feels like or what they're suggesting it is like an AI assistant for not necessarily just for you as an individual, because that's kind of what Copilot for 365 is, but for your team or for your department. It sounds like you might be able to give it tasks, and then it can facilitate meetings.
Wow.
Group collaborator, get more out of the chat, so actually getting us to talk about things, and also maybe help with some of those assigning tasks and deadlines and things like that, like some project management sort of capability. Sounds really interesting.
That sounds slightly scary, but we should just adopt our new LLM overlords, I assume. Right? that largest AI supercomputer in the cloud needs to be used for something, I suppose. So let's just automate all the things, I suppose.
Yeah. Did you see anything that quickly caught your eye?
I did really like the reference architectures and landing zone accelerators that they had for sort of AI sort of intelligent applications. I thought that was good because how you actually integrate them into your organization is really important. Azure AI search has been updated with a bunch of. I did that episode last week. That got a load of really good updates as well. Azure AI Studio is now GA, which is, I think, a really big stepping stone because a lot of organizations want to see that GA, in service maturity before they really, put these systems into production and things like that. So yeah, just again, tons of, for us, mainly AI driven, updates.
Yeah, no, there's definitely.
I think our next episode is news, isn't it? So I think the next news one will cover build and everything else we know from May. We might need 2 hours for that one, maybe, potentially.
Yeah, you're joking, right?
What do you think? We need 3?
No, probably do need 2, but we've got to we'll try and
we'll try and just pick
cram
out
it into a 45. Well, I think our episodes were always meant to be 30 minutes, weren't they? But we never hit that.
Who
so
knows?
45.
Who knows? Right, Alan. On that note, what are we covering this week?
Yeah, so talking about device discovery on your network sort of environment. So there's loads of tools out there to detect this. But this is looking at it from a why I guess from a first point of why it's important, but then how can you do it with some of the Microsoft capability you might already have today, and then bringing it into the Defender XDR portal and what benefit there is there for it for your SOC analysts and things like that. So yeah, that's what we're going to try and cover today.
Okay. So should we start with network visibility and why it's important to have visibility of what's on your network?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of organizations might have something in place, but from maybe it's the smaller organizations, or it can still be the large enterprises. There's an assumption that what's on your network and what's on each subnet, or virtual network, things like that. And you've put controls in place of where you can connect to those networks and things like that, and what's plugged in. But sometimes you can be surprised about what actually is on your network, and we've seen this with we kind of see this from the IoT side or the OT side of sort of networking, that we know what should be on those networks. Yes, there's different security sort of mechanisms around that side, but you 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 plan, what hardware's on there because it's part of your factory, things like that. But you don't know if that when this piece of hardware was replaced, whether it's actually removed from the network or it's just sat there waiting to be disconnected. So it's kind of bringing that sort of, I guess, concept of understanding what's on your network as a potential attack vector there. Having a device that could be compromised, and then have access to your network. Bring that to the IT side, and this would it kind of covers a lot of areas. This could be network hardware, your switches, your access points, things like that. Maybe again you might have decommissioned one of your access points or your switches, but actually it's still out there and you didn't realize because change has happened, it's been decommissioned, you're not supporting it anymore. But there might still be vulnerabilities on it, and potential a way of a bad actor having access to the network to do additional reconnaissance and things like that. So I think that's kind of why it's important. It's kind of validating what you believe is on there and then what is actually there. We've had, I think, in engagements where we've done discovery, we found devices that shouldn't be on the network. We found Xboxes, PlayStations that are plugged into the corporate network, where someone's brought it in, and put it into the cafe area or the recreational area, and then just hooked it up to the network. It's another it's another area, another device that could be compromised that you don't have any control of. So yeah, I mean, just find those devices, but it's also find these rogue devices that are potentially trying to, attack your infrastructure. Maybe someone has come into the office and plugged something in. Again, there are tooling out there, network detect NDRs, network detect and response solutions, that are finding, and stopping stuff from being on your network, especially if you've got you're using something like 802.1x to do that sort of verification and things like that on your networking. But some organizations might not have that configured, or might not be big enough to warrant the hardware to support that. So yeah, that's kind of the reasons why it's important to see that visibility. you're reducing your blind spots to what you know is happening in the environments you're using. I mean, to be fair, you know, organizational networks might be getting slightly smaller because a lot of users are now working from home, and maybe it's just data center or maybe headquarters that maybe has a network now. We have seen organizations now, you know, change their networking, you know, at maybe remote sites, hubs, things like that, to just be plain internet, because, you know, we secure them to work from home. So securing a plain internet site is the same. You don't have to duplicate or, you know, add extra security there. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing that is it fair to say that smaller organizations are less likely to have those more premium and expensive NDR solutions?
Yeah. I think a lot of them need, you know, quite a large some of them may need large investments into appliances, things like that, um, to run on a network that maybe only has, you know, 50, 100 users on it, maybe, you know, maybe even a little bit more, and it doesn't warrant the cost of the appliance and things like that, to manage that network. Or again, they might not deem there being a risk there as well. I mean, that's, you know, because they're so small, you know, it might not be deemed that it doesn't warrant the you know, the cost to sort of put that solution in there. Again, it might be how much, you know, how often is someone, you know, how often is all the, you know, staff in the office as well, things like that. You know, it might not be any, you know, maximum of like 50 a day, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, it's probably a cost to entry for that sort of stuff.
And do you think that organizations, even at large size, are actively having an inventory and tracking against it, like on a daily basis, and reviewing it? I suppose if they got this tooling, that might help automate some of that, I suppose.
Yeah, so we've seen in some scenarios where an NDR is required for cyber insurance. We have seen that in a few instances, to understand what's on the network and things like that. And I think they were, you know, quite large organization at that point, but yeah, that I don't know about having inventory. And again, this is kind of where I was going with previously. You know, I don't think there is in some organization, you know, continuous inventory or continuous monitoring of that, you know, of their network environment. There may be audits, things like that, to understand what's on there. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, you'll be able to detect some of it via, you know, DHCP leases and things like that, but just getting an IP address of a device and maybe its name doesn't really give you much intel about what it actually is on there. And some of these NDRs give you that capability to understand what it actually is, you know, what type of hardware it is.
Okay, so yeah, can you just talk us through how we sort of, do get discovery of these devices, and what technology, that Microsoft's got in this space?
Yeah, so this is changed over the last year, on and off. But in effect, what you can do with Microsoft technology, one is, I guess, if you're in the OT space, is really to use, you know, Defender for IoT, because that is in effect its job in effect is to discover what the endpoints are and secure, you know, understand, you know, not necessarily just the inventory, but understand the communication between all the devices, things like that, and look for unusual behavior or unusual activity in there. So that would really cover your OT side. I mean, technically, you could probably hook it up to your IT side, but it's going to cost you quite a bit to do, and it's not really designed for that, is it, Sam? Really, it's more looking for the OT protocols and things like that.
Yeah, I can remember when we first started getting sort of started with Defender for IoT. When we spoke to Microsoft, they suggested it the OT side of it, just to keep it on on the OT side. And they did have a different solution to that, but I suppose you're probably going to talk about that as well.
Yeah. So that's probably the OT side. So now, for the IT side, really, we can use now is device discovery in Defender for Endpoint. So what this is, and this is what's changed recently, is that in effect, any Defender for Endpoint agent that's on a Windows 10, 11, or 2019 and 2022 Windows Server, that is, those last two, has the ability to do a couple of discovery methods. And this is basic and standard. Basic, in effect, is just gathering information. So when devices on the network broadcast or try to communicate with a Windows endpoint that's got Defender for Endpoint on it, that initial communication is collected, or that broadcast is collected. That is then sent up to Defender XDR, and then that is processed to understand what type of device it is. So maybe that device was a Chromecast that is broadcasting that, it's able to do, casting. Same thing for maybe an Apple TV for AirPlay and things like that. So yeah, in that basic mode, it's in effect collecting the network data and traffic and trying to understand what type of devices they are. When it's doing that basic, it's kind of looking at a couple of there's a list of sort of protocols that it's sort of listening to, but just to kind of do a couple of them, you've got ARP requests, DHCP requests, MDNS, MS SQL, just generally TCP stuff and UDP. So yeah, it's just listening to that traffic, try and understand what the data is and what's in some of those headers and things like that. That it's the device is provided or sent to the Windows endpoints. So then that starts getting you that sort of initial sort of list of endpoints. So now you have standard discovery. Now standard discovery basically does the same thing, but it also then can actively probe those endpoints. So what that does then is, instead of just receiving the ARP requests and things like that, it will then go and look to see if it can ping the endpoint to see if it's still there, by the host name it's been provided, or by its IP address. It will then look to scan or check some of the ports out, and this could be SNMP, SSH, Telnet, UPnP, SMBs, to kind of understand what that device is what services it might be providing. And some of the things, like I think it does, it can try and do WinRM against it. It will look at VNC, and basically it will go and ask that device, in effect, to see if it can get some more information out of it. So it'll try and get find out if it's a Windows endpoint, or if it's like I said, the Chromecast or your Samsung or LG TV. Collect that information and then give you more rich context. And where the device provides it, gives it up, depends on how you want to see that. It might give you the operating system it's running and the version is on. So when it gets that information, that can then be provided up to Defender XDR, and then you can see in effect your asset list there. Same thing for network devices. It will detect network devices that you're going through, things like that. So one thing I guess some people might be thinking about is, well, if these devices are always probing, surely that's going to cause more network traffic. Or if I've got an NDR in place, it's going to cause false positive alerts of my devices, in effect, doing reconnaissance on its on the network kind of thing. What Microsoft have done is that they're not continuously probing all of the endpoints. I think they do it every 2 weeks, and it's also spread out against all of the agents on that network. So if you've got 20, 30, Windows or Windows servers on a network, then it will share that probing across them over a 2-week period. So it's very one, not network intensive, but two, it's not hopefully triggering too much of an NDR to say, this device is now probing everything on the network. So that's sort of how Microsoft did that sort of discovery. Previously, for the networks where there isn't a Defender for Endpoint agent, so say like you've got a VNet or a subnet that's got your CCTV, system on it, or your VoIP phones is another good example, and you don't have a Defender for Endpoint agent. At the moment, you're not able to sort of reach out into those environments and scan them. Previously, Microsoft had a enterprise IoT sensor, which in effect was a cut down version of the OT sensor, which is why I kind of talked about it previously. And in effect, what that would do is you could port mirror your switches to that server for those subnets. So then you could just in effect do basic discovery equivalent for those subnets. So if you've got a switch or core switches or things like that where everything's going through, you could have it all go to a single box or multiple boxes in multiple locations in effect. So yeah, we're waiting to see what Microsoft do around covering those other areas now. They're still supporting the enterprise IoT sensor, but we can't create new ones today. And I think this might just be around they changed the licensing for Defender for the sort of device discovery parts, especially the enterprise IoT part. So I think they're just trying to work out how they can bring that sensor back into that new licensing. But yeah, that's how today we can do that discovery. And in effect, your asset list and things like that goes into Defender into the Defender XDR Portal as assets.
And I suppose, without that sensor, and we are waiting to see what happens on that side of things. I suppose that's if you think about sort of crown jewels and protecting those endpoints that do have MDE on them. That's really where you might want to start. You might not get full visibility. That is where you might need some sort of other NDR technology potentially. I don't know, just a gap fill. Hopefully that's not the case forever. But it is probably fair to say that you're sort of looking after those more critical assets, aren't you? About what they can see and what can see them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And those specific subnets will have firewall rules that only allow specific communications and things like that. Those subnets where VoIP phones are and CCTV cameras and things like that. It is very specific networks. It's not going to be like the LAN where your endpoints are, because they've got to talk to various internet services and all the ports you need for like Defender for Endpoint and everything. So there are more things that potentially open. And as you said, potentially a VoIP phone then trying to attack other Windows endpoints, things like that. If it was capable of, it's got to have those ports open to outside of it. Where you're right, if you've got IoT devices or other devices on the network on the same subnet as your Defender for Endpoint, then they can try to start navigating to the data center in effect from that network. Not to say, like you said, Sam, not to say they couldn't do it from the other subnets, but I think it's definitely more difficult for someone to get there or to get out of that subnet.
Yeah, exactly. If you've got more of a static subnet that, let's say, it only had like your CCTV system on it, you might be more aware of things joining that network potentially. And like you say, have good segregation. rules in place. So I assume, where do the devices sort of get represented? I assume it's in the XDR portal. So, what's the sort of benefits of having everything in sort of one place?
Yeah. Okay. So the devices you see your devices, your Windows endpoints, your Macs, and things like that are onboarded into Defender for Endpoint in the assets part of the Defender XDR portal. And you may have seen it or may not have seen it, but you've got tabs along the top. In effect, show network devices, IoT devices, and categorized. So this is where your device assets sort of live. So you get to a list of them, and with your device in mobile, if it discovers any endpoints that maybe you do own and that you do identify as being a device that you do support and things like that, it will tell you whether the device is able to be onboarded into Defender for Endpoint. So maybe there's a device out there that you're using for that's maybe not on the net on the sub or not on the network, but on the domain that maybe we'll use for guests to project onto the in the conference room or something, as a very bespoke sort of reason, because you probably use some sort of Teams room system now today. But say there is something like that, it will identify devices like that maybe the Defender endpoint has been deployed yet, it's been missed. So that's one benefit of identifying assets that could be onboarded into Defender endpoint. Kind of the second part is that when you're detecting your network side of things, your network devices, again, sometimes they give up some information about their software, which means then that you can get vulnerability information about it. Is that version of the OS got critical vulnerabilities in it, things like that. Network appliances or network devices are slightly different in that they tend to not give you much information for sort of obvious reasons. But you can do authenticated scans against them using SNMP. So you can actually get that extra information from them to then understand, to get that full information. And then Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management will then be able to, provide you with, recommendations to update them. And like I said before, IoT devices, your printers, your cameras, your Chromecast, your TVs, all that sort of stuff. That it goes into that category, and you can put tags against them, so you can say, yes, I know about this device, because it's the TV in the conference room. But again, one thing you can get is if it gives you enough information. The sort of part of Defender for Endpoint, which is sort of enterprise IoT part, you can get vulnerability information about IoT devices and recommendations. So there's some extra sort of vulnerability information, threat intelligence there that can be brought into Defender for Endpoint just for IoT devices there. And then uncategorized in there is just really devices that have been found and are still being processed in effect to understand if they're a piece of a Windows machine or a Windows Mac or desktop or laptop that can be used. If it's a network device or if it's an IoT device, so it's just still not enough information to add it to those other categories in effect. So at one point, you've got all of that information in a portal for you to see. One benefit to this is that, say, there's an incident, let's say there's an incident within the Defender XDR portal. Defender for Endpoint's picked up something trying to SSH one of the machines, one of the servers, the Linux servers. It's been deemed it's trying those times there's no passwords. If you didn't have this information, about IoT devices, you just get an IP address saying, IP address 172.23.46.33 is doing SSH against me. So now, as an analyst, you've now got to go and ping that machine, go and work out what it is, get its get its name if you haven't got it. You now got to do a load of research into finding out what type of device is it. Is it a Linux machine that's trying to do SSH? Is it someone's device? You just don't know. But now, because you've got this asset information against IP addresses, that instant now says, hey, this is a printer. So now you kind of saying, well, why is a printer now trying to do SSH when it shouldn't have shouldn't be able to do that capability in effect? So now you've got reason to believe that device has now been compromised. So now when you need to, you can go and put a firewall rule in on your network to block it if you can, or someone on the site now has to go and disconnect it or switch it off, because now it's a printer and not something random in the office. So that's one great sort of benefit there. The other one, which sort of ties into that, is that in Defender for Endpoint, if a device, a MDE device is compromised, you can isolate that device to stop it communicating out. With this, what you can do is, now you've got those assets in there, you can actually set it to contain that device. Now, what that means is yes, that device can still communicate on the network, and go out to the internet if it's got the if the network's set up to allow it straight out to the internet. But every MDE device now is then sent a firewall rule that you don't see. It's all it's all built into MDE to stop communication with that device if it tries to communicate with it. So in effect, you contain it from your other MDE endpoints, and that happens. I think, Sam, we worked out it's like 30 seconds to a minute, wasn't it? Last time we tested it, when a device is connected to MDE, it's like near real time communication.
Yeah, it is absolutely rapid. Like, basically instant. Yeah, in that type of world.
It's about 15-20 seconds slower than device isolation, which is like 3 seconds or something, isn't it, when we last seen it?
Yeah, exactly.
But still, insane from doing it. So yeah. So now you've got a device that your printer can now not communicate with any Defender for Endpoint device. So even if someone wants to print to it, communication is blocked from it. So and you can uncontain it as well once it's been resolved. As part of that, though, Defender for Endpoint, because it's in effect scan the network and things like that, it will try to follow its IP address. So if if a bad actor has got a device on the network, maybe it's been planted as a severe case of trying to get access to the network. They're trying different MAC addresses to try and get a different IP address, or just doing static IPs, maybe so they don't you're not seen as much. Defender for Endpoint will try and track that device as best it can, and change the firewall rules that is deployed to the endpoints to keep that device from being allowed to communicate with them. So, but yeah, I think that's crazy powerful, that contain.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and it's a disruptive response action, isn't it, as well? Which is, it's not just visibility; it's actually taking action and disrupting attacks.
Yeah, you just got to be cautious. I can't remember if you can or can't do this, but you got to be cautious not to do your router on that subnet, because obviously then you can't communicate with it to get out to the internet to resolve the endpoints. That's more of a sec admin task to make sure that you do check what the endpoint is and what disruption it might cause with it.
That's great. So, how do you get started on?
Yeah. Okay. So you need for some of it, and I guess we won't talk about license just now, but in effect, if you've got the licensing for some of that capability, then by default, some of it is turned on now. So within Defender XDR Portal, you have to have Defender for Endpoint on the endpoints. And in effect, there is a section in the settings for device discovery. And that's where you can specify the what type of scanning you want to do, the basic and the standard. Standard is now turned on by default with new tenants. You can specify which devices scan and which don't. So you can set all devices and then you can exclude others if you want to. You can specify what networks you might want to scan. So it will detect some networks based on the DNS of that network. So if you've got a domain, it will say contoso.local or things like that. And maybe there's some other ones in there that you're unsure about. You can stop them from being scanned. And again, like I said, there is authenticated scan for your network hardware. And that's all in the same sense. So just configuring some on your switches and routers and your other network appliances, an SNMP connection, and then providing that into the scanning solution. I mean, for the authenticated scan, you do deploy a scanner to an MDE device to do that scan specifically, but that is not sort of a specific scanning of a device at that point. And then depending on licensing, then there's also a bit where you can enable the enterprise IoT part, which gives you that extra threat intelligence and vulnerabilities for IoT devices in effect, and recommendations. So you do get some recommendations. I didn't really talk about those, but actually, alerts are going into Defender XDR, like all the rest of the sort of Defender suite. But then it does give you some security recommendations, like telnet managed. Telnet's been enabled on that device, or disable telnet. Insecure protocols like SNMP v1, v2 have been enabled, and you're not using v3. VNC is enabled on that device. Maybe it shouldn't be. So you do get some of those recommendations as well. But yeah, there's pretty simple to set up as long as you got. I think it's two MDE agents on the same network. They will deem themselves as being on a corporate network, and then scan that network.
Cool. And I suppose the $1 million question is how is it licensed?
Okay, so this, like I said, this changed. So if you've got Microsoft 365 E5 or Microsoft 365 E5 security, then you've got the enterprise IoT included. Well, you've got a subset of devices there for the IoT side, but device discovery is included in MDE Plan 2 in effect generally. If you want the extra enterprise IoT threat intelligence and vulnerability sort of information, if you've got either of those SKUs I just mentioned, then you get 5 IoT devices for every MDE E5 or E5 security SKU. So if you've got 100 M365 E5, then you've got 500 IoT devices that you can get that vulnerability information for. If you go over that number, then it is 85 cents per device per month for that intelligence there. So, but some organizations are quite large, so if you can get quite a few IoT devices to be covered. So yeah, most of the functionality is within the MDE Plan 2. It's just the enterprise IoT stuff, like I said, is additional cost or is included in some of those other licenses. So, so that's pretty much it. It's kind of included there. We're seeing a lot of a lot more information coming in. Microsoft recently got some of the Zeek sort of capabilities sort of coming into Defender for Endpoint. So that's going to help with some of that sort of building out of an NDR solution, at least built into this sort of into the Defender sort of environment. I think it's the start of it, at least.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it seems really well integrated, and as long as you've, I don't know, do you really see that people are really gonna, hit that limit and have to buy more licensing? It's quite a generous ratio, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think from what I've seen of the environments that limit will be hit, but you don't know if an organization has a lot of OT in an environment. Maybe it's, I mean, you're saying that there's more than 5 devices per 5 IoT devices per user at this point. I mean, it's
Yeah.
quite, I don't know what they could have to have,
I can imagine that might be the case in very small companies,
yeah.
Where they maybe have very flat networks. Well, okay, that's suppose the flatness of the network doesn't really matter if that sensor comes back, I suppose, right? But they still have some of the operational requirements and IoT requirements that large organizations have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably smaller is where there's probably going to be a bit more of a concern. But I think, depending on what licensing you might have, I think that's also why they've got the per device cost as well there.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
Yeah.
For covering those extras they might have, because it might only be 3 or 4 you need, mightn't it? And that's you don't know. Again, it's one of those things, you don't know how many devices you got until you get it scanning. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Nice. Anything else that you want to cover, Alan?
No, I don't think there is. Again, this is just like a small part of Defender for Endpoint, which is kind of morphed into Defender XDR now. And, I think we've talked about some of these products very high level, and it's just like a small section. But yeah, it's really easy to sort of get started. Again, those devices go into the device inventory list in the tables in KQL, so you can potentially build queries to detect new devices, or get a summary of what type, what's the type of device I've got from an IoT perspective. So you can do some quick easy reporting on there as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Alan. That was great. Any previous episodes you want to call out?
Not off the top of my head, because it's probably going to be, there's probably a Defender for Endpoint one. Well, in fact, there's a vulnerability management one. So season 5, episode 7.
Okay.
That probably ties into some of it. In season 5, episode 4, actually, is Defender for Endpoint. So that's just the general, capabilities in those, with this just being specifically on, device discovery.
And what we're going to cover next time? What's in the next episode?
So next episode, as we mentioned at the start, is going to be our news episode. So it's probably going to be a fair bit of build, that's because a load of things have come out on that. And yeah, anything else that's come out of the other sort of solution, because there was also, I think, RSA a couple of weeks ago as well. So there's probably a few security ones as well that we probably need to talk about. Okay. So did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach out to more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.